Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream. I am your host, Sharice, the Sci-Fi Savage, and we meet right here every single Wednesday to talk all things Star Trek. Today, we are going over the top 5 best Beverly Crusher episodes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, to be fair, there are only maybe 10-ish episodes that completely revolve around the character of Beverly Crusher. So, top 10 would be a little bit of a cop out, right? Because they're not all great. So I'd like to do the top 5 instead, and I have a couple of honorable mentions. So let's go ahead and get started. By the way, if you're watching this live or on the replay, let me know your favorite Beverly Crusher episodes in the comments. So getting started with episode number 5 on my list. This comes from season 4, episode 5, and it is called Remember Me. So in this episode, Beverly Crusher becomes trapped in a warp bubble where the entire universe begins to shrink and she's got to escape in time. But we don't actually know that until the very end. And that's what makes this episode pretty fun. So, of course, it's Wesley Crusher's doing. It starts out with Wesley Crusher doing some kind of project, probably for school, where he's trying to create this stable warp bubble, whatever that is. Now, his experiment is successful, but unfortunately, Beverly gets trapped inside of it, unbeknownst to all of us. All that we know is that while they're at the space station where Wesley's doing this experiment, Beverly is welcoming an old friend onto the crew. I think his name is Dr. Dolan or something like that. Dr. Quace, that's what it is. And so they're kind of like reminiscing about old times or whatever. She takes him to his quarters and she goes about her day. But then later on, she goes to talk to him or mention him or something. And all of a sudden people are like, who's Dr. Quace? We don't know who that is. And she's like, are you kidding me? Like, he just came on board, da da da. And everyone's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So she's like, this is crazy. She can't find him. She can't find any record of him being on the ship ever. She can't find any record of the transporter room ever being used, like, or being used that entire day. And she's like, what is going on? Well, as she's doing this investigation, more and more people start disappearing. And then at one point, it ends up just being her and maybe a handful of other people on the entire ship, because she keeps asking the computer, what's the crew complement? And the number goes from 1,000 something to like smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then at one point, it's just Beverly and Picard on the bridge, and there's no one else in the entire ship. And she's talking to Captain Picard, and she's trying to jog his memory about all the other people who serve on the ship. And Picard's like, I've never heard of these people. I have never heard of these people. And she's like, come on, Commander Riker, Commander Data, come on, you know these people. And Picard's like, it's just you and me, Beverly. We're the only 2 people who've ever been on this ship. And she is like, what is going on? She said, does that make sense to you? That we are in this huge starship with 2 people on the entire crew. Does that make any sense to you? And he's like, well, I mean, that's just the way it's always been. So, at the beginning, it seems like something weird, something mysterious is happening on the ship. But halfway through the episode, you go, okay, something weird is happening with Beverly. And then at some point, it reveals to us that the ship is fine and Quace is fine. He's still in his quarters as far as we know, but Beverly's missing. And Wesley's like, ruh-roh, like, I'm pretty sure I'm responsible for that. So anyways, back into Beverly time. While she is having the computer tell her all these things about Picard, which, by the way, the computer only remembers fewer and fewer people as well. So while the computer's telling her things about Picard disappears. And so now Beverly's the only person on the ship. So she's running through the ship, deck by deck, looking for anybody, asking the computer all these questions. And she makes this statement, which is so outrageous, but actually true, where she says, if there's nothing wrong with me, there's got to be something wrong with the universe, which is like the most self-centered thing I've ever heard anyone say. But in this case, it's actually true, because there is nothing wrong with her. There is something wrong with the universe. So she starts piecing together, something is wrong, something is weird. It's not me, it's the universe. Everything's disappearing. It's not supposed to. I'm the only one unaffected. Let's figure out what's going on. At the same time that Wesley, in real space-time, realizes that he's trapped his mother in this static warp bubble, the Traveler appears out of nowhere and comes to save the day and is like, don't worry, Wesley, I got you. We'll work together to try to rescue your mom. Now, a couple of times throughout this experience, Beverly will be standing somewhere or walk into somewhere, and this huge vortex will appear out of nowhere. And the vortex starts sucking everything in, almost like a hole in space where it's pulling out like the atmosphere and stuff. And she keeps almost getting sucked in. And she doesn't know what the heck this vortex is. So she keeps like holding on for dear life until the vortex disappears. And so now she's starting to panic. So she thinks, I need to contact the Traveler because he would know what to do in the situation. So she tries to plot a course on the ship by herself to the traveler's homeworld, but his homeworld is gone. Not only is his homeworld gone, the entire universe is gone. Not only is the universe gone, but the ship that she's on, which is all that has ever been, according to the computer, starts kind of disappearing as well. So she's like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? And then she puts two and two together, somehow, don't ask me how, that the vortex is an escape route and that she must have been trapped inside of Wesley's warp bubble. So she goes, okay, when did this happen? He started that warp bubble in engineering. If I find my way back to engineering and that vortex shows up again, maybe I should jump into it. So she makes her way to engineering, and she's rushing at this point because the universe is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And Wesley and the Traveler in real space, they've opened up the vortex again. But of course, the vortex can only be open for so long. So they're just hoping she gets the clue inside the warp bubble and knows where to go and figures it out in time. So she's standing in front of the vortex like, should I not? Like, I don't know, if I jump through, maybe I'll be saved, but also maybe I'll be disassembled or devoured by a vortex monster. I don't know. But she takes her heart in her hands, and as the vortex is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, she jumps through at the last second and then shows up in engineering in regular space-time with everything A-okay. So this episode, it's not one that I watch very often, but it is a really good episode. It's one of those ones that kind of takes you by surprise, because as you're watching, you're like, okay, what could this be about? And as you keep watching, you're like, okay, there's some mystery going on. There's some intrigue. And then you're like, wait, here's the thing that I think when I'm watching these kinds of episodes. What would I do in her shoes? What would I do in her situation? And I honestly don't know. It's like a terrifying situation. I don't think I would think the universe is the problem. I'd probably think that I'm delusional or something, like something's wrong with my brain. But in this case, you're just like, how is she ever going to get out of this scenario? And you would never think to jump through the scary vortex, which looks like it's meant to destroy her. So this is just a great episode all around. We get some good Beverly time, and we get to see her kind of using her wits. We get to see her solving this mystery. And I am always here for a good mystery. So that is episode number 5. Episode number 4 on my list of top best Beverly Crusher episodes comes from season 4, episode 23, and it is called The Host. So this is the episode where we first get introduced to the Trill, who are arguably some of the most interesting and like coolest alien species that TNG came up with. So in this episode, Beverly falls in love with this ambassador named Odan, and Odan happens to be Trill. Now, this is the first time we've ever seen a Trill, heard of Trill, anything like that. So we don't know that Trill have a symbiotic relationship between the humanoid host and the like parasitic worm looking like creature. So we don't know that. So all we know as viewers is there's something rumbling around in Odan's stomach that's like growling and burbling and stuff like that whenever he's alone in his quarters. And it's just like super creepy. But we also know that Odan and Beverly are so in love with each other. They are just head over heels. They're giddy. They're silly. I mean, Beverly's telling Troy over like a tea or whatever about how great Odan is and just the amount of fun that they're having together. And she's like, I don't know, I feel kind of like a young teenager just totally in love. And I don't know, am I being irrational? And Troy's just like, girl, just live your life. Just enjoy it. Just like do you, which I love that. Anyways, Odan's an ambassador, and he's on his way to resolve a conflict between two warring people. I think it's maybe one planet and one alien species, but two warring people of that species, or I'm not sure what. But in any case, he's the person who's going to come and smooth over all the problems and bring peace to these people. So originally, he's going to transport down to the planet, and the Enterprise is just like taking him there, and he happened to fall in love with Beverly on his trip. But they want to transport him down to the planet's surface, and he's like, no, I cannot do transporters, which is a little bit shady, right? You're kind of like, why can't you do transporters? But, some people don't like transporters. So they're like, okay, cool. You can do a shuttle if you really want to do a shuttle. So Odan takes a shuttle to the planet instead, and boom, his shuttle gets attacked. And not only does it get attacked, it gets attacked to the point where he is mortally wounded, which is so heartbreaking because Beverly just found love, and now the person she's in love with is sitting in her medical bay, like fading fast. So she gets to work and she's like, she puts on her doctor's hat. She's like, okay, what do we need to do to save his life? And that's when she discovers the symbiote living inside of Odan. And she's like, wait, because, if there's this big worm thing inside of the man you love, your first thought wouldn't be like, oh, this is part of him. Your first thought would be something about aliens or something, the movie Aliens, something like, did this creature kill him, or is it eating him, or like what's going on? So she removes it. Somehow she finds out that this is a symbiotic relationship. I don't even remember that part, but I do remember that the parasite it looks like a parasite. I don't know if what you actually call that part, but the big worm part needs to be in a humanoid host. It can only survive outside of the host for a very short amount of time. So it needs to be placed in a host. And so they're talking in the observation lounge, like, how do we preserve this creature? Because this actually is Odan. And I think at this point they're in contact with people from Trill. But the people from Trill, it's going to take them a while to get there with a new host. So I think that's how she's getting this information. So they're like, okay, the symbiote needs to be in some kind of host until the new Trill host gets here. So Riker volunteers, even though he's not totally compatible with Trill, he volunteers to surrender his body for a short amount of time so that these negotiations can continue. So Beverly puts the symbiote inside of Riker. He comes to, he does okay, like he's still alive, but you can see it's really weighing on him. Like he's got the dark circles under his eyes and all of that because he's not compatible with the Trill, protein patterns or whatever. And so like this is not sustainable for the two of them for very long, but it is sustainable long enough for Riker to continue the negotiations. Now, of course, Riker has to explain to these warring people, I'm still Odan, I'm just in a different body. Surprise, surprise, we can do that. And they believe him, which is a relief. And they agree to this. And he ends up doing his job very well. Peace is brought to the sector. Probably the only time Riker has been an ambassador, and it's been really effective. And it wasn't really Riker, it was Odan. So yay, that's done. Day is saved. But Riker, on the other hand, is fading fast. And the symbiote is still fading fast because it needs a Trill host. While this is going on and while Riker's deteriorating, he's still trying to continue his relationship with Beverly, like the same way that Odan was before. So he still wants to cuddle and snuggle and make out in the turbo lift and all of this. And Beverly's like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Because while she was all about that life with Odan, she does not have a romantic relationship with Riker. It is a professional relationship. It has been a professional relationship for years. And that's just a weird thing for her mind to wrap around, that you are still Odan, but you're in Riker's body. So the Trill host finally arrives, and the Trill take over doing the transplantation at this point because they're the experts at all that stuff. So now she's waiting. Beverly's sitting in her office in sickbay, like, okay, Odan's going to be here any minute, and we can kind of start back up this beautiful, like, exciting romance. So she's waiting. And then Odan walks in, and Odan is now in a female host. And she's like, what the what? So this guy has transferred bodies not once, but twice. And it's all over the place with her. She's just like, I don't know what she was expecting, but she definitely wasn't expecting this. And you just see the look on her face like, what is going on? Again, similar to when the symbiote was inside of Riker, when the symbiote is inside of this female host, it's still Odan. And so Dan's like, he calls her Dr. Beverly, it's a cute little pet name for her, which is so adorbs. And so he's just like, she's like, Dr. Beverly, it's me, it's still me, and da-da-da-da. And she just says, you know what? Beverly says, you know what? I'm just going to have to call it here because I cannot keep up. You keep changing bodies every time I turn around, and I can't keep up. Who are you going to be tomorrow? Who are you going to be next month? Which actually is a fair question. And something that Odan told her earlier when she discovered that there was a symbiote in all of this is she said something like, you should have told me or something like that. And he was like, I didn't even think to tell you. Do you go around telling people that you're a singular individual? I don't go around telling people that I'm a symbiote. Like, it's just who I am. I don't even think that needs to be said. And I thought it was really interesting because it shows some of the cultural differences that we should expect in a spacefaring folk, right? Like there should be some major cultural differences where that clash from time to time. So I really appreciate that. In any case, Beverly says, I'm sorry, Odan, I've got to call it quits here because this is just too much. It's overwhelming. I can't keep up. I can't take it. So Odan kisses Beverly's wrist and says, I will never forget you. I will always love you. And Beverly's like, I'll always love you too. And then Odan, in the female host, she walks out. And Beverly just kind of, she's very polite and professional and kind of smiles, but it is heartbreaking for me putting myself in her shoes because they had such a strong connection. And it feels like it was so raggedly torn apart, it wasn't totally abrupt because there were different host bodies and different opportunities to have conversations, but the change, it, like all of that just feels like the rug was pulled from under her, right? She's just in this wonderful, blissful, happy relationship. And then all of a sudden it's different. So my heart just really goes out to her. And I just feel like he was such a like good guy for her, and she could not put up with the Trill changing body situation, which is fair because she's not going to change bodies. Like her body will continue to age in the same body she's in, but who knows how many more times Odan might need to change bodies in case his, hosts get damaged. So, anyways, super interesting episode. Another thing about the Trill is the Trill come back in Deep Space Nine and the Trill come back again big time in Discovery. And they change the makeup for the Trill from what we see in this episode to what we see in, I'm totally blanking on the name of this episode, but it's an episode where this woman is presented as a gift to this other political leader, and she has the ability to like imprint on someone and become their perfect person. And she chooses to imprint on Picard before she's given away to this political leader. And that makeup is what they decide to use for the Trill, was the makeup that alien woman had. And it's gorgeous. And I think that was the best decision they've ever made. The Trill in this episode in The Host, they look cool. Like they look like cool aliens, but they don't have the like beautiful ringlet things that they decide to go with, which I just think are just gorgeous. And then they take that to a whole nother level in Discovery where they say like, oh, these spots are just like a fingerprint and all these things. I don't know. I just think it's beautiful. I think it was a great choice. Super interesting episode. And I love that they brought this particular species back for DS9 to explore more, because we almost never get that. There's very few aliens that we get to see even in another episode of TNG, let alone in another Star Trek series. So definitely a plus. Okay, episode number 3 on my list comes from season 5, episode 16, and it is called Ethics. This is the episode where Worf gets paralyzed. And this episode's really intense. Like, there's no light, happy fluffiness going on in this episode at all. It's just really serious and dark. But I also think it's kind of haunting. It's a great story, and it shows the potential dangers of scientists and doctors when they lack morals or ethics, which is the name of the episode. So in this episode, at the very beginning, some crates or something fall onto Worf inside of some cargo bay, and they break his spine. He ends up in sick bay and not able to move at all. So he becomes a paraplegic. He can't move anything. And for him as a warrior, he's like, this is not the life for me. I am not going to live my life like this. Now, Beverly tells him that there are treatments and therapies available. However, even with the best treatments that are available, he will only regain up to 60% of his mobility. That's with the best treatments, and that's with him working really, really hard, doing all his rehab, doing all the stuff. He could get up to 60% of his mobility back. And so Worf was like, 60%, that might as well be zero, because to him, he's thinking, and I think he even says something like, I'm not going to be lurching around the hallways. Like, that's not how I'm going to be. And you got to imagine, probably a lot of Klingons have that same viewpoint, that they are warriors, they are fighters. And if something inhibits their ability to fight, there's no reason to go on. So he asks Riker to assist him in a suicide attempt, or a ritual suicide, according to his culture's belief systems. And Riker's like, yeah, I'm your friend and I'm here for you, but that goes against my morals and against my ethics. So now you have all of these layers of what's right and what's wrong, especially in this particular situation. Well, enter Dr. Russell. Dr. Russell's on board for some reason, I don't even remember, but Dr. Russell's kind of like this hotshot research scientist and medical doctor who is very unethical. She is constantly practicing medicine in the worst way. Basically, she's using all these experimental drugs and experimental technologies on her patients to further her research. And a lot of times her patients don't make it after her treatments. And she's like, well, more research, more data, meh. Like she just doesn't care. In fact, so a couple things she does, and that's what this, and I'm a trained scientist, so watching her in this episode is so painful. Like it's so like revolting, and it makes me so angry, but it really makes me think, and that's why I appreciate this episode so much. So as far as the Worf story goes, Dr. Russell tells Worf, I've got this experimental technology that I could use on you that will 100% restore all of your mobility. It will completely cure you. And Worf is like, okay, let's do that. I mean, it's that, or it's plan A, or it's this. So I'm totally fine with that. And Beverly is like, why are you giving him false hope? You've never even tested this treatment on any humanoid. You've only tested it in the holodeck. That is not enough data. That's not enough information to try this on a live person. I'm not going to let you try this silly stuff on my friend and my coworker. Like, you're not doing that. But it is Worf's decision. And Dr. Russell kind of sneaks in and talks to him separately. And Worf is like, yeah, let's do that. Like, I'd rather take my chances and let's just see what happens. So in addition to that kind of practice, at some point, I think there's like a mining colony or something that there's an explosion or whatever. I don't know, but there's tons and tons and tons of people who are injured. So all these people get brought up to the Enterprise for treatment. And it's so many people that they end up converting some old cargo bay into like a triage center, especially since, there's only like 3 beds in all of sick bay. So there's all these patients. And so Beverly's running around, Dr. Russell's running around, everyone's running around trying to help these patients. And some patients pass away at some point. Lots of people are all over them, but at some point Beverly notices this and she's talking to Dr. Russell about it. And she goes, oh yeah, and she's, Beverly's like scanning them with her tricorders. And she goes, why don't I see any XYZ drugs in their system? And Dr. Russell goes, oh, I didn't try those. I tried my own experimental cocktail and it just didn't work. And Beverly's like, why didn't you try the approved drugs that could have helped? Why did you try some experimental cocktail with no hope that it could help? And Dr. Russell's response is like, well, they had burns over all their body, most of their body. They probably weren't going to make it anyway. So I figured, why not do something for research? I mean, it just is the most callous and cold thing. And Beverly says something like, you scare me. Like, your just complete disregard for life is terrifying. And it goes against everything I stand for and everything you should stand for as a doctor. Well, anyways, fast forward to the surgery that Worf agreed to. They do the surgery, they complete the surgery, and Worf dies on the table. This experimental surgery does not work, much like all of the experimental stuff that Dr. Russell does. So Beverly is understandably upset. Dr. Russell's a little bit sheepish. I don't know if she feels guilty, but she's a little sheepish. And I mean, you got to tell Worf's son. I mean, it's just like such a mess. But a few hours afterwards, Worf comes back to life. And that's because as a Klingon, he has all of these redundant systems. So they all kick back in and kind of bring him back to life. And he does end up getting all of his mobility back. And it does end up being successful. He does have to do some rehab and all of that. But he does end up getting 100% mobility back by the next episode. So at the end of the episode, after Worf has come back to life, which he doesn't come back to life till like the last 5 minutes of the episode. So I remember watching this and just being like, oh my gosh, like, is this permanent? Are we losing Worf from the crew? Like this, that would be so traumatic. Imagine a Star Trek universe without Worf. Actually, no, don't imagine it, because that is an awful thought. Anyways, in the last 5 minutes, he comes back and you're like, oh, good. I'm so glad he's back. And, now Riker doesn't have to go through with it. And Alexander still gets his dad and all this stuff. And anyways, Dr. Russell comes to talk to Beverly, and she's just like, well, looks like my techniques worked, didn't it? And Beverly's just like basically giving her the silent treatment and just working on her data pad. And Dr. Russell's like, you can't admit it, can you? You just can't bring yourself to admit that I was right and you were wrong. And Beverly is like, you gambled with Worf's life. And fortunately, Worf won. This is not about you and talking about how great you are. You're not great. And what you did was horrible. I'm just glad that Worf didn't suffer because of it. And to be honest, he did suffer because of it, but his redundant systems brought him back to life. So anyways, this episode is so good. Like, just the ethical concerns that it brings up, the thoughts of what research should look like, and the value of life or lack thereof. This is just a really deep episode with, I think, just a lot of layers to it. So that's why it made my list. So good. Highly recommend you watch it if you haven't seen it in a while. Okay, episode number 2 on the list comes from season 6, episode 22, and it is called Suspicions. So this is the episode. Oh man, this one's so good. Okay, so this one's kind of the opposite of last episode, which was so heavy and like serious. This one is also pretty serious, but this one's much more of an action mystery. So it's a lot faster, and I think the energy to it is a lot lighter because of that. So here's what happens. There is a scientist named Dr. Rega, who is a Ferengi scientist, and he has created this technology called metaphasic shielding. And what it can do is it can put a special shield around your ship or your shuttle or whatever, so that way you can survive in a star's corona. So, if you like see the sun, where you see like the fire from the sun squirting up and stuff like that. That's like the corona or the outside edge of the star, of the sun. And usually, which is super hot and will cause any ships to explode. Usually when we see it used on the show, something's being tricked into getting into the star's corona, and then it explodes as soon as it touches it, right? So the scientist, Dr. Rega, has created a technology where presumably your ship could be safe inside the corona of a star, which has all kinds of implications. I mean, you could do research inside there. You could, as we later see in the show, you could hide from the Borg inside of a star's corona because they can't follow you in because their ship will be crushed, and all kinds of things. But because he's a Ferengi, nobody will listen to him because Ferengi scientists are not highly, regarded because Ferengi are not known as being scientific leaders. So Beverly says, you know what? I think this work deserves to be heard. So she causes like a little, she creates like a little conference basically for a handful of scientists, whoever agreed to come. It only ends up being like 4 or 5 people, but whoever agreed to come to see Dr. Rega's work firsthand, to evaluate it, to see how far along it's come, is it viable, all of these things. So a handful of people agree to come. A Klingon scientist comes, a Vulcan scientist comes, maybe like a human scientist maybe comes, and this scientist, I forget the name of his alien species, but it's an alien species we've never seen before and we never see again. Talokan or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyways, his name's Jabril. And so he comes as well. And they're all like trying to see if Dr. Rega's work is legit. So they put it on a shield. They put it on a shuttle and they're like, we got to test it. We're going to put the shuttle into a star's corona and see, does it really protect the ship from exploding? Does it protect the occupant from radiation, dying from radiation damage and all of this? And so they felt like it's not fair if Dr. Rega tests it himself, because Dr. Rega was like, I will test it right now. I will show you this technology works. It is ready, is 100% done. Like, I just need more funding and then we could expand this and all these things. So he was like, I will test it right now. He was so zealous. But they were like, all the other scientists were like, no. You can't test your own thing because you have all these biases and you might like fiddle with the data. So Jabril volunteers. He says, I will do it. I will test it. I will put my life on the line for science. So he gets in the shuttle. He flies into the nearest star's corona. Everything's looking all good. And then suddenly, and they're in visual contact with him this whole time. And then suddenly he starts gasping like he can't breathe. And they're like, what's going on? Come back to the ship. And he's like, oh, I can't make it. And so he kind of like limps out of the star's corona and then immediately dies. So they're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Dr. Rega's technology is not ready. It's not done. It's not safe. And Dr. Rega is like, I don't know what happened. I've checked everything. That shouldn't have happened. That should not have happened. So Beverly does an autopsy and cannot figure out how Jabril died. Like, cannot figure it out. And so they're like, what happened? And Dr. Rega's like, I swear this technology is safe. I don't know what happened. But Beverly's like, you know what? I'm going to have to recommend that we do not move forward with this technology. It's just not ready. It's too dangerous, right? It just killed some guy. So sorry, we are not going to back this. You got to do some more research, come back in a couple years, 2-3 years, and we'll see where technology's at then. And Dr. Rega's like, dude, it's ready now. Like, I don't know what happened there, but I will go again. Like, I will test it and prove to you that it works. And they're like, no, we cannot allow you to go and get in the shuttle when we just saw what happened to Jabril. So they say, okay, let's disband the conference. Unfortunately, this is going to be a pass for us. Well, come to find out a few hours later, Dr. Rega shows up dead in the science lab. And they're like, what the heck? And it looks like he's dead by his own hand. But Beverly feels like it's really suspicious. And it seems more like someone's trying to sabotage his work. But who could it be? So she wants to do an autopsy on Dr. Rega to see how exactly he died. But apparently, according to Ferengi customs, or at least in this episode of Ferengi customs, the autopsies were not allowed. The families did not want any autopsies. They just wanted him to be returned to them so they could bury him according to Ferengi rites. So Beverly was not allowed to autopsy. And she's like, but, there's something going on here. Like, it's suspicious. It's a very suspicious death. And I want to make sure that there's nothing else we need to be worried with. And Picard is like, nope, Prime Directive. Somehow the Prime Directive applies here. And he's like, nope, doesn't matter who. We need to follow their customs and not do anything with the body. So Beverly's all right. Beverly's like, okay, fine, I won't. So she starts investigating the situation and trying to see if there's any chance that anyone else could have possibly murdered Dr. Rega. So she goes and talks to the Klingon and the Vulcan, and she's doing all these things. And she goes, you know what? The only way I'm going to get down to the bottom of this is if I do an autopsy anyways. So she does. She autopsies Rega, even though the family said no and Picard agreed that they wouldn't. And here's the worst part of this. Not only does she disobey direct order not to do an autopsy, but she finds absolutely nothing in her autopsy, like no new information. So she did it for no reason. So she goes and tells Picard immediately what she did, and he's devastated and disappointed and all this stuff. And she's like, "Great, I'll probably get a court martial. Like, I no longer work here on the ship," and just all of these things. And she's feeling really sorry for herself. And this is actually how the episode starts: is she's feeling really sorry for herself. She's in her quarters and she's like packing her bags because she's leaving the Enterprise. And then Guinan comes in with tennis elbow and is just like, "You're the only doctor I trust. I'm not going to trust any other doctor in sickbay. Like, tell me all your woes." Basically, Guinan pulls a Guinan, and Beverly tells her everything. And then Guinan's just like, "Sounds like you need to keep investigating." And Beverly's like, "I can't. I'm already in so much trouble." And Guinan's like, "Really? What else could you do? Like, what more could happen to you? If you've already quit and you're going to be court-martialed, there's really nothing that they could hold against you, right? If you keep on investigating." And Beverly's like, "That's true. I have literally nothing to lose. Let's go." So she decides, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get in the shuttle myself and fly into the Stars Corona, because I really think that Dr. Rega's work was legit. Like, after looking over everything and doing this investigation and looking over, the shuttle from top to bottom, this technology should have worked. So I'm going to prove it. So she steals the shuttle and flies into the Stars Corona. And she's like, "It's working." She's like, "It's working. I knew it. Dr. Rega had it right all along." And while she's celebrating, like, this cabinet or whatever pops open behind her in the shuttle, and Jabril pops out. Like, the guy who died in the beginning, who she did an autopsy on, who was in the morgue last time we saw him. So he crawls out and attacks her. And I mean, this part of the episode, you're just like, what is going on? Because you totally don't see it coming. And so as they kind of like scuffle or whatever, they end up, he ends up doing the bad guy monologue, and he tells her the whole thing. He says that in his species, they are able to slow their body, slow their metabolism to the point where it mimics death. Like, that is a thing they can do consciously. So he did that consciously to trick her. And because every single thing in their body is redundant, kind of similar to how we were talking about Worf has a bunch of redundant systems, but this is like to the nth degree. This is more like a flatworm. If you cut a flatworm perfectly in half, you'll get 2 brand new flatworms because everything is like mirrored. So I guess he's kind of like that. So even though she did a legit autopsy on him, everything just knit back together and nothing was harmed enough to like keep him from coming back to life consciously, which is nuts. Like, I wish they would have explored this more in future episodes. I wish we would have got to see this alien again, because how interesting is this? But of course we don't. Anyways, so he tells her all this, like, I tricked you basically, because I wanted everybody to think that Rega's work was a failure, that none of it worked, because I plan to steal not only the technology, but this entire shuttle with its technology and take it back to my homeworld. I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to turn it into a weapon. So I'm going to become the most famous arms dealer, like, in the Alpha Quadrant, and it's going to be amazing. So unfortunately, Beverly, this is where you get off, because you're ruining my brilliant plans. So somehow Beverly gets a phaser or something and sets it to level 10 and disintegrates him, turns him into just dust and ash, which I felt like was kind of unfortunate. Because now, how do we back up any of her claims? Like, how do we prove anything? So I don't know if there's a constant log being recorded of everything that happens. Probably, because sometimes we are able to see things that happened in a shuttle after people are gone. So maybe the computer records it, or there's some kind of technology, because I felt like that was your best piece of evidence. Like, he confessed to everything, and then you disintegrated him. You didn't stun him, you disintegrated him. And I guess because of his physiology, you couldn't really stun him, because, I mean, she literally did an autopsy on him and it had no effect. So the only thing she could do was disintegrate him. I guess handcuffs or a force field wouldn't have been equally effective. That's neither here nor there. This episode's really, really good. There's adventure, there's mystery, you don't know what's going on, it keeps you guessing, and it's just a really cool piece of technology too. That's extremely practical, which you almost never get with Star Trek, because it's so fanciful, right? It's space, and it's reverse the polarity, and it's just kind of techno babble that doesn't really mean anything, but it sounds really good. And in this case, it's like, wait a minute, you created technology that can help me stay in a star's corona, like, unharmed. That's super neat. Like, right now, as I am as a human on Earth, I think that's really, really cool technology that I don't need to be some cool spacefaring person to understand. So anyways, highly recommend. Super good episode. Okay, the first episode on my list, my favorite Beverly Crusher episode on all of Star Trek: The Next Generation, comes from season 3, episode 25, and it is called Transfigurations. This is the John Doe episode. This episode's so good. Okay, so at the beginning, they come across this shuttle crash on a planet where I think there were like 5 different bodies in the crash, and one of them was a survivor, like a sort of survivor, like barely still alive. His entire brain was actually exposed to the elements, which is never a good sign. But Beverly brings him back on board, and uh, tries to save his life, but there's really nothing she can do. And his physiology is so advanced that she doesn't even understand it to try to help. But thankfully, this person has regenerative abilities. So she notices that his body is knitting itself together without her help, which is amazing. And it's knitting itself together pretty quickly. In addition, she notices that his cells are mutating and he's becoming something else. He's transforming into something. So she's like, I don't know what's going on, but here's what I'm seeing. And I'm just going to keep the patient comfortable until he's kind of back to normal and awake. So a couple of days later, he's back to normal and awake, but he has no memory of anything, complete amnesia. So they decide to call him John Doe. John Doe is extremely sweet. It's kind of another love story. And I think John Doe is just the perfect person for Beverly, other than Odan, who I also think was the perfect person for Beverly. But John Doe and Beverly kind of just, they really hit it off, and they really enjoy each other's company. And even Wesley is like, yeah, go mom, go, and Beverly's like, oh no, I don't know if I could, but this is the perfect person for her. Anyways, so we discover a couple things about John Doe. One, he's got healing abilities, not just for himself, like with the quick regeneration, but also with others. So at one point, O'Brien comes in to sick bay because he's torn something while doing some sport on the holodeck. And John just touches his shoulder. You see this white light, and then all the pain is gone. And O'Brien's like, what the heck? How did you do that? And he's like, I don't know. I just kind of did it. And then, so that's one thing. He has healing abilities that can just heal small harms, but he can also bring people back from the dead, which is nuts. So at one point, he's trying to run away. He's trying to escape the Enterprise, and he's going to Shuttle Bay. And I think he's trying to get away because the people from his homeworld find out that, or they're trying to trace back to his homeworld to get him back to his people. And since he has amnesia, he can't tell them where he's from, but he does have this strong feeling that he does not want to go home, that it's dangerous. Like he has this instinct, but he can't tell them where he's from or why that instinct is there or any of that. So at one point he tries to run away. He tries to go to the shuttle bay and like steal a shuttle and get away before the people from his home planet intercept the ship. Well, while all this is going on, somehow Worf ends up falling from a high balcony in the cargo bay and breaks his neck and actually dies. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, so Worf died twice, which is nuts. And like twice on the show, which is nuts. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, like it's such a shocking moment that you're just like, I can't believe that just happened. But John Doe walks over to him and touches him. And again, the light glows and Worf comes back to life and he's fine. Totally fine, not even a bruise. And you're like, what? Is there anything this guy can't do? But in that moment of saving Worf's life, now he's too slow or too late to get away from the people from his homeworld. So they're like, dang it. So they take him back to the bridge. And, or actually, I don't even know if he goes to the bridge or what they do with him. But at some point, the people from his home planet come and the captain of that ship is talking to Picard. And he's like, you need to give us, John Doe. I don't know if they're referring to him by any kind of names at this point, but they're like, you need to give us John Doe because he is a wanted criminal in our society. And you need to give him to us immediately because his punishment is death for all of his crimes and all this stuff. And Picard's like, yeah, no. He's like, I need more information than he's a criminal and his and his punishment is death. I need more understanding of the charges, which is so interesting, right? Because Prime Directive, like if somebody says this person's a criminal and you need to give them back, I feel like you kind of have to give them back. You can't be like, well, explain to me what the crime was. Let me see if I agree with the crime. Like, I don't think Picard had a place to say that, but he said that. And he was like, I'm not giving you anybody. Because by the same token, someone could just show up and be like, oh yeah, that guy's a criminal. Give him to me. And it's like not true, right? That could also be the case, which actually was the case here. So Picard's like, no, I need to understand more about the charges. I'm not giving anybody to anyone. And at some point they tell this captain about John Doe's unique abilities, which freaks this captain out because that's exactly why he wanted to kill John Doe in the first place. He wanted to kill him before he developed these abilities. So he attacks the Enterprise and destroys their life support or something, or attacks them with some kind of weapon that removes all the oxygen. So everyone on the ship is dying. And John Doe is like, what the heck? So he sees it all and he has this big flash of light this time that saves every single person on the ship, like instantly. He gives them all their oxygen back and fixes whatever was going on and stops the attack or whatever. And then he like blinks and he brings that captain from his ship to the bridge of the Enterprise. Like he transports him with his special abilities. So his abilities are just growing by leaps and bounds at every second, which is amazing. And he transports him over there and he goes, I remember now. I remember everything. And again, this is like 5 minutes left in the episode. So you're like, what could possibly happen next? Because we've seen Worf die. We've seen almost the entire ship die. We've seen, a love story between Beverly and John, and we've seen him heal people. Like, what could possibly happen next? So he says, I remember everything. And here's the story. His people are on the edge, on the brink of an evolution. And their next level in evolution is to become what John is becoming now. But the powers that be are terrified of this process. They do not want their people to evolve. They don't want them to change. They want them to stay the same. So whenever somebody starts exhibiting symptoms or signs that this change is happening, the government comes along and murders them all. So John and 4 other people like him escaped the planet with that shuttle, and they were running for their lives when they either were attacked or they crashed accidentally. I don't remember the details. Like I thought they were attacked, but I could be confusing that with a million other episodes. In any case, they were running away so that they could let the evolution take place naturally and see what the next step was. But that's something their government did not want. So he basically John tells the captain of from his homeworld, he says, you can't stop this anymore. It's too late. Like, it is time for us to evolve. It's time for us to become who we're meant to be. And you will no longer be able to suppress this and to kill everyone who starts to exhibit these signs. And then he kind of steps away from everyone and he has this big gasp, and then his entire body turns into a ball of light. Like a whole, I mean, it's so cool. You just got to watch it. I mean, the CGI is like not spectacular. It's basically just a guy in a full bodysuit that's white, but the idea is cool that his body turns into like a body of light. Is just such a cool idea. And he says, this is what we were meant to become. We're turning into energy beings and we'll have all these powers and all this stuff. And he tells the captain, he says, I can do this for you right now. Like, I have the power to basically evolve you this instant. And the guy was like, no, I'm good. Because he's not ready to do that. Mind you, it's his job to hunt down people like this. So he's like, I don't want to become one of you. I want to stay myself. I'm good. So John's like, all right, I'll leave you the way you are. But just know that this whole reign of terror on people like me is over. And so he zaps that captain back to his ship, and then he says goodbye to Beverly, which is so bittersweet. And then he just kind of turns into light and disappears forever, and we never see him again. And we don't know what happens next. And you can kind of just, I guess what he goes on to do with his newfound life and powers and stuff. But this episode is just perfection, right? It's got mystery. It's got a love story. It's got romance. It's got such action. It's a thriller. There's moments where you're really like, I don't know what's going to happen next or how are they going to get out of this. It's just such a great episode all around. I highly recommend, if you have not seen this episode in a while, check out season 3, episode 25, Transfigurations. It is perfection. Okay, now onto my honorable mentions. I have 2 honorable mentions for best Beverly Crusher episodes. They are not great. But I feel like I have to talk about them. So I added them to the list because I feel obligated. So honorable mention number 1 comes from season 7, episode 8, and it is called Attached. This is the episode where Beverly and Picard are telepathically linked through this little piece of technology that's put onto their brainstems. So in this episode, the Enterprise is considering half of a planet for entry into the Federation, which they usually don't do. It's usually the entire planet or the entire culture, species, however you want to put it. In this case, it's a divided planet called Kesprit, where it's made up of the Kes and the Prit, who look exactly the same, but are somehow different. And they hate each other, and they're super paranoid, and they're at war, and they're always fighting. So the Kes want to join the Federation. The Prit don't even know about the Federation because they're so xenophobic that they don't talk to anyone. They don't communicate with outsiders. So we don't even know what's going on with them. Anyways, Beverly and Picard are on their way to negotiate with the Kes president, ambassador. And while they're transporting, the Prit kidnap them in their transporter beam and put them into a prison cell. And they put these little things on their brain stems to I'm not sure what it's supposed to do. I think it's supposed to monitor something. I really don't know. But the effect it has on humans is it just telepathically links them so they can share all of their emotions and thoughts, which is like, to me, the worst thing you would want if you had a prison. You would not want your prisoners to be able to collude with each other without your knowledge telepathically. This is like the worst situation. But my only guess is that it works differently on the Kesprit than it does on humans. In any case, they end up in prison and the Kes are holding them prisoners because they're like, why? The Federation must be supporting Kes and like giving them weapons to use against us, and we don't want that to happen. And then the Kes are trying to break Picard and Beverly out of jail, and it's just the whole thing. But at one point, Beverly and Picard do escape in the most ridiculous of ways. I mean, this episode has so many plot holes, you could fly a Galaxy-class starship through them. But in any case, they escape, and they're going through the wilderness, and they're trying to make their way from the Prit side to the Kes side. And the reason why I included it here is because during one of their campfires, we finally find out that the two of them have feelings for each other. They don't say it. They still don't say it, but they telepathically communicate it, and we are aware of it. So basically over dinner while they're talking, or I guess I don't even think they have food at this point, but they're just chit-chatting over the campfire. And Beverly says something, and she's like, wow, Jean-Luc, I didn't know you had those feelings for me. And he's like, well, I felt like I couldn't actually say anything because of your husband. And it just didn't feel right to his memory, even though he's been gone for 20 years and whatever. And you're like, so you guys are in love, but you are not going to act on it because why again? We don't really get a good answer to this, but they decide to be just good friends. So at the end of this episode, they get the little implants removed, and I guess it takes a while for their telepathic link to dissolve, but of course it's dissolved by the next episode. But the reason why I included this episode, even though I really very much don't like it, is that I love that we finally get to have some kind of open conversation about the fact that there's chemistry between them. I would have loved it more if they hooked up in this episode in any way. Like if they hooked up and then they said the next day, no, this was a mistake, Jean-Luc. I'd be like, okay, as long as I got my little pound of flesh or whatever. But I would have preferred, I mean, at the time I was a kid. I'm saying this now, I'm like, I would prefer this. But as a kid, I was just like, what the heck? Like what was even the point? I would have preferred that they end up being boyfriend and girlfriend by the end of the episode. And they just carried that through. I mean, this is season 7 for crying out loud. There was only a few episodes left of the entire series at this point. So just let them freaking be together. That still irritates me. But anyways, that's why I added it as an honorable mention, because I do think it was a good episode for their relationship, even though the plot of the episode was dumb. The second episode, my second honorable mention, comes from season 7. This is episode 14, and this episode's called Sub Rosa. So another not great episode, but I used to love this episode. This is the episode where Beverly falls in love with that green smoke ghost. I used to love this episode as a kid, just because I thought it was like, it's like a ghost story, and it's like kind of creepy, and I don't know, it's visually gorgeous, like so beautiful. And it just was like, it was a pretty simple story for me to understand as a kid. Like, oh, it's like a love story, but like the person she's in love with is really like a bad guy. I don't know. I just really liked it. Watching it as an adult, I am horrified by this episode. So in this episode, Beverly goes to her grandmother's, the planet her grandmother was living on, to her grandmother's colony, and her grandmother basically raised her. So she's got a really close relationship with her, and she runs into the 30-year-old lover of her grandmother, who becomes her lover. And we find out throughout the episode that this man was the lover of her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, and on and on and on, and every single woman in the, Beverly clan for hundreds of years or something like that. Which, like, that's just gross. But this ghost thing turns out to be some kind of alien that actually is feeding on Beverly and all the women in her line, because they have some kind of special peptide bond or chemical something in their bodies that's like a perfect fit for this alien. So he's been using this whole, tall stranger of Ronan for centuries, just feeding off of the family. Now, in his mind, there's nothing wrong with that, because in exchange, they're getting a steamy love life, a secret steamy love life, of course, because all of these women were like married and had kids. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a continuous line. So the thing with this alien is he seduces these women physically, yes, but he's almost never corporeal. So it's more like he seduces them in their minds, and he affects their bodies at a chemical level rather than like physically, which means he can be affecting their bodies all day long, all night long, whether or not their husband's there, like in all kinds of scenarios. So he can be really sneaky with it, is what I'm saying. So he feels like, I mean, yeah, I'm feeding off of you, but I'm not hurting you. And not only that, but I love you and I'm just giving you so much love and pleasure. We both win and all of this, which would be sort of true, except for in this episode, he starts killing people as they get closer to uncovering the truth. So he's just like killing people left and right. And at one point, he almost kills Jordy and Data. And that was when Beverly was like, that's it. I'm done with this. Like, we're through, and I cannot let you keep feeding off me. So she blasts him with a phaser, and he disappears into smoke and dust. And she falls apart because at this point she's like chemically addicted to him. But she's able to recover. By the end of the episode, she's kind of back on her feet and she's talking to Troy about the whole situation. And she's just like, I actually love him. Like, I still love him. He's gone and I love him, which is so sad because she just buried her grandmother a few days ago. And now she's kind of grieving again over this new romance and love that she was deeply in love at a chemical level. And now it's kind of taken away, or like she, blasted it away or whatever. So while the episode is very weird, very strange episode, like this is not the one where I'm going to be like, you got to go watch that. The reason why I gave it an honorable mention is because the actress who plays Beverly Crusher, Gates McFadden, she just kills it in this episode. She is so good. I love seeing her in this episode. And that was true when I was a kid, and that is true now. I mean, granted, the person she's playing is kind of nuts. Like she's very unstable. She's all over the place. She's just not herself, right? And so it's not that I love that she's unstable. I love seeing her range, because on a show like this, people can be very kind of the same week after week, right? All they do is just say acknowledge, engage, like that's kind of all they say. So with a limited amount of dialogue and not too many storylines that are completely about your character, it's really hard to see the emotional range of a particular character. Like, how do they feel about things? They can only be like pretty, like not too far off of neutral from how they always are. So what I love about episodes like this is that we get to see her being lots of things. And this is kind of the opposite of how we see her in the episode Remember Me, where we get to see, the best of Beverly Crusher. We get to see Beverly being like ultra Beverly, right? We get to see her using her cunning and cleverness and all of that. This is the opposite of that. This is where we get to see Beverly be someone totally different, like someone not at all like Beverly, someone who's impulsive and someone who's irresponsible, right? Because she quits her job at the drop of a hat and all of these things. And I just really enjoy seeing the range of this actress, which is why I included this episode as an honorable mention, even though it's not the best episode in the world. Okay, well, that's my list. So let me know, did anything on my list match your list? If you have a favorite Dr. Crusher episode or a favorite Dr. Crusher moment, let me know in the comments. Until then, I will see you next week and every week, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, to talk all things Star Trek. So in the meantime, live long and prosper.